Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be talking about the 5th anniversary Japanese stream that occurred last night. So, to mark the 5th anniversary of Puzzle & Dragons, the basically Gung-Ho threw a very elaborate and large stream in which they announced many different quality of life improvements, evolutions, and tweaks, changes to how Puzzle & Dragons is played. So this was a post basically I kind of came up with somewhat on the fly. It's maybe missing a few things here or there, just mostly highlighting things that I feel are of greatest interest, and I may or may not have skipped or overlooked certain aspects, so feel free to chime in where appropriate. I do link in the article the Puzzle & Dragon X posting on it, so again, those might have updated information as more things are translated and whatnot, so just take a look there. So again, you can always watch the stream through this YouTube link here. I think it's like 5 hours long, so it might take a while, and it is in Japanese, so again, I don't really understand it. So the first major change to occur is basically the Monster Box folder system. And it's basically a way for you to sort and or filter your Monster Box in whatever way you think is most intelligent. We're going to be basically having several different folders. There's going to be an all categories folder, basically just everything that like what normally is already. There should be one that's categorized. There should be two that are customizable, so you can basically put whatever you want in there. There should be evolution materials, awoken materials, and enhanced materials as well. So again, it's a way to just quickly sort and or filter your monster box to only display the information that is most relevant to you. So this is a major quality of life improvement, and for someone like myself who spends a lot of time looking at their monster box, this is going to be quite exciting because now I can really min-max my organizational skills, if you may. Hopefully this comes to North America soon because this is probably one of the more exciting updates, and at least it impacts every single player. The next thing they announced was 3-person co-op, and this is unusual to say the least, because in all honesty, co-op was met with very mixed reviews, and adding in a third element to this may cause some concern. Now, unlike the co-op that we're very familiar with right now, there's actually going to be quite a few caveats or restrictions put in place. So, for instance, there's going to be no shared leaders and there's no shared health, but we shared the same board. Now, if you actually watch the video from above, you can actually see that in their 3-way co-op, there's actually 3 distinct different teams, but they actually just share the board. So say player A matches their turn with their, say, XYZ team. They clear the floor, and then it goes to player 2. And player 2 has a completely different team with completely different leaders, completely different subs. And they actually have just the same board that carried over. So let's say the first player tries to set up the board as best as possible and kind of prep it for the next person. The next person has that prepared board, but they have a completely different team as well. And then the same also applies to player 3, and it just goes through a cyclic formation. Now, your own health is actually based on your own teams, and it's actually separate from your teammates, because let's say my team has 20,000 health and your team had 30,000 health. When it goes to your turn, you have your 30,000, but let's say you got injured and you're hit to 15,000. You would stay at 15,000 when it comes back to your turn. When it goes to my turn, I'm still at my maximum 20,000 health. So it's almost like we're playing solo, but we're kind of playing alongside each other. So it's very different. It feels unusual, and it's a lot more fast-paced because we only actually have 30 seconds to plan and make your move. In addition, your active skills only charge on your own turn, so it's actually going to be quite slow to recharge. And in addition to keeping that whole like soloistic nature, your awakenings are not shared. So skill boosts and skill bind resist, or the resistances, recover binds, do not apply to your teammates. So you are basically on your own. You're just sharing a board with someone. Now, there will be no badges, so we won't have like the 15% health or 35% recovery. And that can feel a little more challenging because, again, we do have basically playing solo mode without any additional perks. However, we still will have the multiplayer boost awakenings take effect, but Ganeshas will only affect your own self, and other players still get to play through if you die. And based on the video, it looks like, say, player A dies, player B just continues playing onward, and then player C would continue if player B were to fall. So I'm not sure how the rewards are structured. If, say, one player completes the dungeon and the other two die, does everyone get the rewards? So again, there's a lot of questions to be asked. It's definitely unusual. It's definitely a very big twist on the whole co-op aspect. But one thing that is interesting is there's going to be a matchmaking system. And this matchmaking system will help facilitate you pairing with someone else. So I really am excited for at least a matchmaking system because there needs to be some more connection between pad players because in all honesty, the mailing system is very archaic, it's slow, it's kind of outdated. You don't even get notifications to say that someone messaged you, so it's cumbersome, and the fact that you could hopefully find teammates through the game itself is a big step in the right direction because right now we have to rely on third-party applications such as Discord or Facebook groups to find teammates. And this might help solve and at least make this a more popular playstyle overall. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that this can be very beneficial because it looks like we could actually carry a player very heavily through a dungeon. Now, again, we don't know how the stamina is going to be charged. What is it going to be a cost reduction stamina to make it more appealing like how regular co-op is, but I feel like you can definitely carry a third person because a lot of carry strategies nowadays do heavily rely on their partner having the correct cards and basically relying on their skill boost to help make your team do more. However, if a player is being heavily carried, they probably may not necessarily have the corresponding leader that's appropriate, and they probably don't have a team whatsoever. Furthermore, that player basically has to make a move every other turn. And in this three-way, we actually only have them making a third of the turns. Furthermore, because every team is separate, that player being carried can just simply load up on cards that have pure defensive mechanics and just simply survive to the end. So, for example, they could bring, say, a Green Odin as a leader with, say, an Amaterasu pairing or something with just purely health or recovery multipliers and simply just survive when it is their turn. Like, they just tank the hit and then just heal up. They don't do anything else. They don't try to kill the floor. They just survive. And because they have all these defensive leaders, it doesn't make a difference because the two people that are carrying them will actually just have their own teams intact and don't even care what that carried person has. So this does definitely open up a lot of potentials for carrying someone or perhaps even cheesing your way through dungeons because we don't necessarily know how the rewards work because what we could do is almost have like a battle of attrition in which player A and B basically die to the death mechanics, but player C triumphs. And if everyone gets the rewards, this actually works out in everyone's favor. So again, if like more details are released and the Japanese player base starts being creative, we might see interesting ways to basically clear challenging content. So it is an interesting thing. And one other thing I want to point out is that there's going to be 3 unique teams here. And because there's 3 unique teams, we can obviously not only cover 18 different active skills because regular co-op's 10, solo mode 6, but with more active skills, you have more diversification, you can counter more mechanics, but you also can counter, basically can counter mechanics that are very challenging for your particular team. For instance, Heart Cross teams tend to struggle on heavy combo shields, especially when they have to make a Heart Cross plus a row. It just takes up so much space. And say one player has a Heart Cross team, the other sides could have, say, a purely combo-centric team. And that way, when you get to a combo shield floor, basically the team that has the more combo-centric playstyle can easily bypass it, and the Heart Cross team can just do their thing on the subsequent floors. So it's just opening up more potentials for basically cheesing your way through harder dungeons. But with that being said, there's the possibility that harder dungeons may start emerging. And my hope is that there isn't too much dependency on co-op, because some people obviously don't enjoy that aspect of the game. Next was a Verdandi buff, and Verdandi was basically the winner from Arena 1 speed race. Basically, several different notable players in Japan raced against each other. The first to clear Arena 1 with their team basically gets a card that they vote for buffed to a certain degree. And we've had various cards like this buffed in the past, and Verdandi is the most recent one now. So out of the pool for this stream, there was actually Awoken Lucifer, or Archdemon Lucifer, Ariel, and Red Sonya. So Verdandi getting a buff is okay, but I'm not sure how they're going to go. Like, they could easily make it just very lackluster because she already has 9 Awakenings. So unlike, say, Ryune, who got a stat boost plus Awakenings, Verdandi may or may not have much of a buff because they might just boost her stats or maybe try and boost her leader skill. But boosting her leader skill might be challenging because it has to be a dramatic increase. And she is only a 5-star Godfest exclusive, and Gung-Ho tends to not love them very much. So what may end up happening, of course, is something akin to what Tsubaki gained, basically a split evolution that gave him Killer Awakenings. That would allow them to actually reshuffle Verdandi's kit overall, and it might improve her viability for the most part. So I was kind of hoping a little bit that Lucifer would get the buff, because Lucifer, for about a year's time ago, was actually one of the more popular leaders, and it's because he has that nice tank playstyle, and to be honest, his multipliers for health and recovery are okay, it's just his attack is a bit lackluster. Just look at Krishna by comparison, it's not even fair. So if Lucifer had a relevant buff, this could have been quite significant, because his sub-pool is actually dramatically improved over time, because now there's more triple typing, so thus more gods and devils, there's more reincarnated evolutions, just stronger cards overall, so it could have been something significant. Ariel was basically a TPA sub for mirror teams, and she does lack in base stats and awakening, so it could have been a dramatic buff there. And Red Sonja, I feel, really should not have won, which she didn't, of course, but because Red Sonja's potential for buffs are probably quite low, she has to be weaker than Blue Sonja, because Blue Sonja is a 6-star, and Blue Sonja has reasonably strong viability, but not crazy viability in that sense. So I feel like Red Sonja just is kind of lacking. It's just awkward at this point in time. The next thing to be announced is a rank 500 egg machine. So we've all loved the 150 and 250 rank egg machines in which we pull and get a special card. Basically, it's just a free reward. Like, how can you complain, to be honest? And giving one out to players at rank 500 plus is amazing, in all honesty, because we actually are pulling from the legendary heroes or the gemstone princesses. And while the legendary heroes are okay, the gemstone princesses are amazing because they are simply the strongest damage enhanced possible. They basically transform any team into a team that can deal lethal amounts of damage. Like, it's just not even fair how powerful they are. And at least for myself, I'm actually very excited because if only just one of my 2 accounts pulls a relevant gemstone, I can transform basically my teams into one that hits incredibly hard. So this is great news. Look forward to that. Like, I don't think anyone can complain about that. In addition, they're having a rare machine renewal as well, in which they are removing undesirable cards such as fruit dragons, late bloomers, and the elementals. Now, the fruit dragons have never been really viable. They're just kind of weird. There was a bit of hype and flash because they had so many awakenings upon release, but it's not helpful overall at this point in time. Furthermore, we get them for free from the single fruit dungeon, if that's what it's called. And the late bloomer dragons have another dungeon, again, similar, some other gift dungeon I forgot the name of, but we can acquire them that way. And the late bloomers have some viability now, I'd say, just because they can act as a buffer for skill delays because their base skill is 30 turns. So you are able to inherit them and basically protect yourself against disastrous skill delays such as Hephaestus Dragon's 15 turns. So it gives some stat boost. It's not terrible, but the elementals do have niche value. I'm saying niche because voiding damage for 3 turns from a particular color does not necessarily help in most cases, but against certain dungeons it might make farming much more easy or manageable just because you can dodge execution mechanics. Now, I'm not sure how they're going to compensate for them being removed because we don't actually have any other way to acquire them, so my belief is that they are going to be another sort of gift dungeon and we can just play and exit repeat until we get the one we want. So overall, it's great because we're basically removing some of the least desirable monsters, and now we just really need to get rid of Pad Z characters. There's going to be some buffs to the Kenshin collab. They're not announced yet, so I will update my Kenshin collab review accordingly when those come to North America. The next part here is one of the more exciting aspects, in my opinion, because we now will have 55 inheritable Descend monsters. And skill inheritance, for the most part, has been restricted to rare machine cards and only a few farmable options at this point in time. And by granting players the opportunity to actually use these cards as skill inheritance does open up certain team building restrictions because now we have access to active skills that we may have not had beforehand. And some of these are unique and powerful. And I'm just going to point out the more notable ones, but one thing you should keep in mind is because these are all farmable, we all can acquire them. And if they have very long base cooldown, you can actually use them as purely skill delay buffers or simply stat boosts, because some of these cards boast like 700, 800 weighted stats. It's just a free way to transfer those stats to a card of your choice, as well as having a buffer against skill delays. So that is a creative way to utilize this for the average player. But in terms of notable cards, I feel that Couchumar is going to be quite powerful because they have a Zuo board with a damage reduction shield that's on an 11 or 22 turn cooldown based on how skilled up they are. So while Zuo's board is not necessarily the greatest in the game, at least you have access to like a fire, wood, and dark board and a 30% damage reduction. So you can of course combo that with other orb changes to create a 2/3 optimal board of your choice, such as dark teams basically using Couchumar, then Pandora to create a 2/3 dark board. Again, it's opening up options, but it's great to have a full board changer that is reasonably relevant. Next is Anna Valkyrie, and Anna Valkyrie has one of the more powerful dual purpose actives in that she converts hearts to light and then enhances light orbs. So you're basically covering an orb change and damage enhance all at once. So dual purpose active skills are great because it basically frees up a sub slot for other utility you may need to counter a dungeon, because you're basically killing two birds with one magic stone. And this is great because, again, you might have a mono light team but may not be able to squeeze an Anna Valkyrie anywhere. You may want to simply inherit her active skill onto something with better stats or awakening. So this is quite powerful overall, and a great application I can think off the top of my head is either using Saria boards and then making a 2/3 optimal board, or even just Raphael and then Anna Valkyrie and just a full board of 30 enhanced light orbs. Lots of potential there, and she does have very high weighted stats, so again, a great transfer. Next is, okay, there we go. Next is Lynthia and Gainot. And Lynthia and Gainot have full board changers that produce all 6 elements, so the 5 colors plus hearts, in addition to one type of hazard, either jammers or poisons. And this will always result in a minimum of 7 combos, because you always have at least 3 of each element. And this is a possible alternative to Dark Callies, especially for Raw Dragon teams, because now you can use, say, a high stat base sub who is ideally unbindable, such as, say, Reincarnate Parvati or Reincarnated Anubis, for instance, and inherit Lynthia or Gainot over top of them. And if you do that, you are obviously having a much longer cooldown compared to Dark Callie, but at least it's something that is workable. And if you are missing one Dark Callie, this is a viable option you can use. And while the jammers and poisons are cumbersome, and if they are produced in higher amounts, so say like a multiple of 5, it can be a little awkward because you technically have to erase them all in one go, because there's most likely not going to be any jammers or poison orbs falling down. So in most cases, I would recommend using Gainot for this, just because the jammer orbs are not going to hurt your health. Let's say the board had exceptional amounts of poison. Why deal extra damage to yourself just in case you don't recover enough, or you're expecting a large hit, or whatever reason? Like, why take a little bit of extra risk? Perhaps the only exception would be, say you're using a wood-based sub and you want to get the stat transfer. Next is the Green Serpent Dragon, whose name I will never pronounce, and their main value is basically poison. And now that they are inheritable, we now have an inheritable poison, and that's a big deal because not everyone was fortunate enough to acquire the red Odin Tamazo from the one-shot challenges, and not everyone has a red Odin or a Neptune. So this is a great option. Like, everyone can acquire this Green Serpent. And while his board change may not necessarily be the most helpful, you can at least combo it with someone like, say, Australis, and that does create a modestly lethal board, because in theory there should be 50% wood orbs if you basically convert them to 5 colors plus jammers and then Australis afterwards. So this is a pretty exciting one in my opinion. And last is Zhang Fei. And Zhang Fei is often forgotten. I had to double check him, to be honest, but he actually has a Dark to Wood along with a 1-turn delay on an 11 to 20 turn cooldown. And while Dark to Wood is somewhat covered by Awoken Liu Bei, not everyone has Awoken Liu Bei, or not everyone wants to break hearts at the same time. So it's a reasonably unique orb changer. Plus the fact that we have 1 turn of delay is valuable because, again, not everyone has a delay option. So this is a great way to bypass resolve or danger mechanics, or even just take a turn to set up your board. So another great option, something to look forward to. And one nice aspect of having a delay between North America and Japan is you actually have the time to farm up all these cards, skill them up where required, and be ready on day one to use them. Next are buffs to basically 55 cards to keep in tune with the whole 5-year anniversary theme. And I'm going to mention a few notable ones. Some of them haven't been really translated, and I don't sometimes like Google Translate because reincarnated Bastet becomes like aroused Bastet, or awoken Bastet becomes aroused. It's just weird, and I get confused. I'll just wait for someone to translate it. But again, the point of these posts is just to give some preview. It's not fully covering every aspect available. So some of the more notable ones that I was able to find out about were Dantalion, and I've somewhat bashed him in the past because it's just not that viable of a card. Yes, lots of damage is great, but lots of damage doesn't mean much when you can't survive hits. And his use as a sub was somewhat limited because we don't need those heavy orb enhances because of Krishna being the best fire lead, not requiring additional fire orb enhances. So he was just in an awkward place. And with this buff, he actually becomes quite a viable leader because now you actually will gain 30% damage reduction for 2 sets of heart combos. And this translates into 51% damage reduction overall. So now you can make 2 fire crosses and get 1,350 times attack with 51% damage reduction. And that would be enough to basically blow up any spawn you can imagine, and you can now survive pretty much most hits in the game. So now you just basically combined amazing damage and survivability into one card. It's feeling a little like Aizen, except you have that basically buffer against large damage. Now, obviously Dantalion is vulnerable to bind, so that is a downside. But another great aspect of them is that you have a very heavy scaling multiplier. You can basically control your damage. You can elect to make 1 or 2 fire crosses. You can also elect to make 2 heart combos or not 2 heart combos. So there's a great amount of damage control here, so that is beneficial. So you should be able to handle most encounters in the game as well that have those absorption mechanics. It may not necessarily make him a top tier leader, but it certainly makes him feel a lot more like a 6-star. And in terms of my Godfest exclusive tier list, he's probably going to be moved up a couple notches to reflect this. Next is Reincarnated Anubis, and Anubis actually received quite a significant buff to his leader and active skill. Now, his leader skill will now begin scaling up 8 combos, and that's huge because most given boards will have 7 to 8 combos, and now you don't have to rely on luck to at least put out some damage. In addition, you also gain 1.5 times or 2.25 times with dual leaders recovery for using an active skill. So now all you have to worry about is health, because you should always be able to heal up enough health every single turn. And this is dramatically lowering the randomness or luck-based playstyle he has, because now you should be able to activate 8 combos in most scenarios, as well as being able to heal up to full every single turn. So now you basically covered 2 of the more vulnerable bases he had, and this is going to make him a much more consistent leader. Obviously, he's not going to be the most consistent out there, but this is a big improvement to consistency. Now, he also received a -1 turn to his active skill cooldown, and the -1 turn to his active skill is quite beneficial because his base skill was never that powerful or impactful. So this is actually going to allow you to inherit something more easily over top of him and have access to it 1 turn earlier. Now, this obviously is helpful as a leader, but as a sub, this actually gives him more viability. Again, because you would be using Anubis as, say, a heavy stat stick, as well as something that's bind immune with the Recover Bind Awakening. So now your Mono Dark teams now have access to a bind immune card who can clear binds a little faster or of a row. This also makes him slightly more desirable as an alternative Dark Kali based sub and inheriting something over top of him because his base cooldown is shorter. Next is Bastet, and she basically received a very similar treatment to Anubis in that she has -1 turn to her active skill, which helps because it's pretty sad to begin with, and the recovery component. So the recovery component is huge. Again, I just want to emphasize how important it is for these teams because there is a certain amount of vulnerability when you are trying to deal damage. And if you can use an active skill every turn, such as through Gunma, you are able to always have more than enough recovery to heal back to full every single turn. So now Best Cat all has to worry about is her health. And that is great because now you can use the health badge and you can just use higher health subs and just rely on the recovery multiplier to heal you up. And next is Sheet, and Sheet gained a dramatic boost to her base attack, and she is now basically, once again, the hardest hitting TPA card from just a base active or base attack point of view. Now, a lot of people may be losing their Sheet over this because it's impressive, but unfortunately, Sheet really doesn't have a good home. No team can really capitalize on those TPAs efficiently, and she's still kind of lackluster overall because she doesn't offer much else to the team and may just still end up being a assistant through skill inheritance. Until Water has a better TPA team, she's just going to remain awkward in my opinion. Next is Avalon Drake, and Avalon Drake gained a 4th skill boost, and that 4th skill boost is important because now it puts him on par with Tengu and Blue Odin, so you now have another option or a base for skill inheritance, or just a sub that has the ability to help ensure all your active skills are ready by turn 1. This is important for obviously Awoken Blue Bay farming because he has the Rose. It's also important for no duplicate dungeons or all attribute dungeons because they cover different elements than Tengu. So this is quite a big boost, and I foresee this having a great impact on a lot of farming teams and possibly future ranking dungeons. And then the next one I want to highlight is the Mech Dragons. And the Mech Dragons are probably something you've rolled excessive amounts of in the past, and they're being blessed with an additional skill boost and a Row Awakening. So while it may not feel like a massive buff overall, it's actually quite significant because with the popularity of more button farming teams, such as Yamamoto and Mary from the Heroine collab, we now have access to cards that are able to produce their row of orbs 1 turn faster because of the skill boost, as well as helping the rest of your team, in addition to that additional Row Awakening for bonus damage. So it's actually quite significant for those farming style teams, so it is useful overall. And there has also been 55 new evolutions being released, and again, not all of these have their information being released at this point in time. I think it would have probably overloaded the stream and they probably haven't even finalized them, but this is exciting because a lot of these cards were in need of a buff of some degree, and hopefully they do them justice. So a few I want to point out are Reincarnate Izanagi. He has often been regarded as an inferior or poor alternative to Miru in the sense that you just roll him from the rare machine, awaken him, and you can skill him up much more easily than Miru, as well as having a much gentler evolution tree. So it was basically used as a easier alternative for players who couldn't necessarily farm Miru. Now, he has been buffed quite significantly with this evolution to an 8 times attack and 2 times recovery for God, Dragons, and Balance cards. So this does provide a higher base damage multiplier, and that recovery bonus is significant because you are now able to stall on any floor provided you actually have 3 hard orbs present. So it's a little less orb hungry in that sense, but he still faces 2 glaring problems. He has a weak base active skill, and he is vulnerable to binds. Now, we can obviously counter the vulnerability to binds by playing solo mode and using the badge for bind immunity for your leader, but that means you basically sacrifice 15% health if you had to use mirrors, so that just kind of feels sad. And yes, there is a damage burst component in his leader skill or in his active skill, but I would much prefer to have Heart Orb Maker like Miru, because in all honesty, I'd rather be able to survive than deal a bit more damage, and you would probably want to inherit a stronger burst active anyways. So this is an upgrade, and it does give players at least the opportunity to jump on that Heart Cross bandwagon if they're not strong enough to farm Miru. Just pair with a Miru friend and be on your merry way. Next is Sakuya and Yomi, and both of these cards were actually some of my favorite leaders during their prime, with Sakuya actually carrying me through maybe like the first 1.5 to 2 years of my pad life. And I was hoping really badly that they would receive meaningful evolutions and buffs to their viability, and unfortunately they just became stronger glass cannons. And in this day and age, a glass cannon is fun to play, but it's not practical in endgame content because while you may be able to blow up every single floor, you need to be able to survive and dance around challenging mechanics. So it's not going to really improve their viability. It's going to improve their fun because you get bigger numbers and they have a lower activation threshold in terms of the amount of combos they have to make, but it's going to feel like you're playing like an Awoken Yumesachi Yamasachi, that they're fun, they can kill things really well, but they can't survive. So I just wish they had gained some sort of defensive mechanic, because Reincarnated Haku basically gained what I was hoping Yomi and Sakuya would have, because Haku actually has a 30% or 51% damage reduction of dual leaders to all attributes just passively, and that's huge. Like, that's a massive amount of damage reduction, and perhaps to counter that, they've obviously dramatically lowered her, well, not lowered, but she has very low base attack at only 20.25 times. So you may struggle a bit to kill a lot of content just because you do have low damage, but you only have to actually match 2 colors. You have to match fire, water, or dark, any 2 of those. So you can bring orb changes to help condense your board afterwards. So it does have some potential. I'm assuming the other Chinese Celestials will follow that path. But she also did gain a single 7 combo awakening, which could provide a modest spike for herself on Dark Athena and Yomi Dragon teams, who she's probably going to be a relatively stable sub for. So this is an improvement from her sub point of view. But again, I was hoping that damage reduction component would go for Yomi and Sakuya. And even if you tag on like a 7 combo threshold to activate it, it would have been amazing. Next is Reincarnated Persephone, and Reincarnated Persephone basically gained amazing artwork, along with a revamped leader skill that allows her to basically achieve on her own 1.5 times health, recovery, and 5.25 times attack. So while dual Persephone is nothing spectacular, this is actually a very good pairing with Dark Athena for those who can't afford the 750,000 monster points. With this pairing, you are able to at least provide a skill bind resist, so your team building is actually more gentle. And while you do sacrifice some you sacrifice a modest amount of attack and a tiny bit of recovery, the recovery part is actually better this way, because you are now able to activate some recovery without having to actually deal damage. So you do have a bit more damage control and stalling potential. Just your maximum damage output is going to be lower, and Persephone doesn't hit as hard because of less TPAs, less multiplier, and she is also vulnerable to binds. But still quite a strong evolution overall. It's probably going to help her uses on Dark Athena teams, because she will have stronger base stats. And last but not least for the evolutions I want to highlight is Reincarnated Astaroth. And Reincarnated Astaroth basically will now provide 4 times health and 64 times attack for devils and healers. And this does provide the capacity to clear endgame content once again. It's obviously not going to be as reliable as other leaders out there. However, her main problems are still going to be the somewhat restrictive typings of devils and healers, as well as no recovery, so you may struggle to heal up after hits, even though you have a very large health pool. And now I'm just going to touch really briefly upon the Heroine evolutions. For the most part, these are relatively disappointing. Like, I feel like Gung-Ho overhyped them, and they just failed to deliver on that hype. They pretty much just sprinkled like 1 awakening onto all the 5 stars, and just very, very slight modifications to leader skills as well. So you can read my full Heroine Rare Machine post here if you wish, but I'm just going to touch upon the evolutions that provided some interesting benefits. So Mito has definitely had a big upgrade to her artwork, because it's a lot more appealing, because I just felt it was awkward before, but regardless, she's kind of following a very light Metatron style awakenings, in that she gained the Recover Bind. I felt like she should have had Recover Bind to begin with, so it's kind of just shoring up the aspect she was lacking from before. But maybe a skill boost would have helped, because she's probably going to be used as a very specific farming sub because of the dual devil killers on and it will make Awoken Liu Bei be able to farm much more efficiently. So it is a slight boost, but to be fair, Awoken Liu Bei teams do not need a bind clear really, because Awoken Liu Beis are bind immune, and they also have a built-in bind clear active skill already. So it's not that great, but Mito is probably going to be one of the most popular Heroine cards in terms of usage, just because of the dual devil killer awakenings. And I need to blow my nose. One sec. So next is Kuvia, and Kuvia is another strong 5-star role, because she does have 4 TPAs, and they actually just gave her a very large boost to her base attack. So now she's on par with some of the hardest hitting TPA cards in the game, so her viability as a sub has dramatically improved, and she also gained an extra skill boost, so it is nice, but I feel like obviously players want more, because it's still only 6 awakenings now with the skill boost. Next is Momaji, and she basically became a much more appealing sub on mono light teams because she gained additional skill boosts, which does help out, and she does have, I think, 200 more base attack, and that does help supplement her double TPA awakenings. It's going to make it more appealing on, say, Mirror or other mono light teams. Next is Mel, who rhymes with hell, and they gave her a skill bind resist awakening, which is nice, but she doesn't really have much value. Yes, they boosted her leader skill to 7 times with 2 heart combos, and in theory, you could probably pair with Dantalion because he just got this buff as well. But that's a really, really budget pairing. Her active skill has a strong chance to override your fire orbs, and it's just she still needs a lot of help in my opinion. Next is Mary, and Mary was a card I actually own on both my accounts, so it's someone that I love to use, and she does have a lot of end game potential to clear content, and I am going to be writing a team building guide on her soon, and it's more so team building for end game content because she's actually able to farm Arena 3 very consistently and very fast. So I was hoping she would gain more viability as a leader for that sort of context, not just the whole push button farming swipe like Awoken Liu Bei. Unfortunately, Gung Ho is disappointing in this regards because all they did was give her 1 more water row, which she really does not need, as well as a higher base attack value when I believe you would connect 9 connected water orbs instead of 8. So now you can hit for 126 times attack. So in most scenarios, at least for me, I don't really feel like I was lacking damage that badly to really need that extra oomph. Perhaps really just Gaia Dragon is the only scenario where you want the higher multiplier, at least from Arena 3 point of view. And from push button farming, I don't even think there's any scenario in which a full board of water doesn't kill everything. But it is a 26% increase to attack, and in theory that extra 2 rows from both leaders does provide some value. So you may have to readjust your damage control against certain encounters if you're playing her as a traditional leader, but it's just a little lacking overall. If she had gained a skill boost, she'd have at least more viability as a farming team. If she had a skill bind resist, time extend, bind immunity, a tiny health multiplier, all of those would have been incredible by comparison, but she gained more damage, so not much has really changed in my opinion, except from her artwork point of view. Her artwork has been improved significantly. Next is Romia, and Romia's current form is basically just a very pretty card to have. Like, yes, you do have some lots of time extends, but you may not necessarily need them in most cases. But her evolution is actually a reasonable buff. It's helping out a card that kind of needed it quite badly. She does gain a skill bind resist, which does make her a more appealing sub for sure. However, it's not really necessary if she was used as a leader, because when you're using her as a leader, you're usually pairing her with someone else. So yes, Romia had no skill bind resist, but if your leader plus 4 subs did, it addresses the problem. And giving her a skill bind resist as a leader doesn't really do much because, again, most cards have skill bind resist, so it didn't do much. However, she did actually gain a boost to her attack multiplier. It's now 5 instead of 3 times, so that is an upgrade. But again, we don't really have a great leader pairing. There's no Ilm equivalent to pair with, so I feel like it's just not going to be used that much still, but she is prettier. Next is the Fire Eshimali, and they already had 9 awakenings, so Gung Ho can't really change them up, and her awakenings are kind of like that classic Eshimali style in which she has 7 orb enhances, skill bind, resistance, skill boosts. So they can't really change that. So it was either like stat boost or a change to her leader skill, and she did gain a small increase to her recovery, but team building is just awkward as is. But the hefty stat boost is nice, as well as very upgraded artwork. Next is Barbara, and Barbara probably had one of the more disappointing evolutions because Barbara's active skill boosts machine and dragon type cards, and it would make sense that her leader skill would as well. Unfortunately, she still boosts only machine type cards, And that has been her main problem because her team building is very restrictive. You don't have much options. It's mostly like Eshimali, Castor, and Diadem, who is the Dark Cyber Dragon, who did get a buff. But the point of the matter is you don't have much to choose from, and while her multiplier actually got improved to 4 times health, 4 times recovery, and 64 times attack, your team building is awkward. Now, gaining a Time Extend Awakening was actually quite powerful because that team I just listed before has no Time Extend, so this will actually help. Yes, people argue that Time Extends are like a get good thing or a crutch, but if your whole team has 0 and you only have 4 base seconds to make TPA matches all the time, this will help overall. And last but not least is Ilmina, and Ilmina, or the Ultimate Fluff, gained a very surprising evolution because it dramatically changes her kit. She loses 2 skill boosts and all 3 Killer Awakenings and has them replaced by Skillbind Resist, 2 7 Combo Awakenings, and 3 Dark Resist Awakenings. So, from an Awakenings point of view, it feels like a big downgrade. And I guess to compensate for this, they've improved her leader skill because she's now able to achieve 4.5 times attack when matching Fire and Light Orbs, as well as providing that 7x6 board. So now if you pair with Ilm, you have 45 times attack and 2.5 times recovery on a 7x6 board. So that is nice, but I feel like taking away the skill boosts and the Killer Awakenings kind of broke apart what made Ilmina kind of special aside from her artwork. So maybe players in Japan will find special and powerful uses for her leader form. Maybe those that have multiple Ilminas will have even more fun, but it just feels a little unusual in my opinion. And 7x6 boards, while sometimes powerful, are not really needed to clear endgame content, so maybe it might be used for, say, just ranking dungeon, just being able to achieve a much higher damage multiplier and thus better boards and better scores. But I feel like it's kind of a weird direction to take what was a really interesting and unique 7-star monster. So in conclusion, there was definitely a lot of exciting changes that did occur, and which will be coming in about 2 months' time or so to North America. So we do have lots of things to look forward to as well as prepare for. Now, I may or may not have missed or glanced over certain things. Certain things I felt, such as like Navi's evolution, were pretty meaningless, so I didn't really touch upon it. But feel free to chip in your opinions of things that I overlooked or things that you feel were not addressed heavily enough. And I ideally want to try and release a Monster Point Dragon overview or finish that question time post before my procedure on Tuesday, so hopefully I can get around to that. So this was maybe a slightly rushed, but hopefully you all have a fantastic day and happy puzzling.